Hi folks, with Tassless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of how to solve, assuming a solution is even possible, how to solve inner city gang, ghetto, hellscape type violence. Now we're talking, murder rates that are off the charts here in like downtown or the south side inner city areas of Chicago and Baltimore and so on in the United States. Now, there's Washington D.C. for example as well. There's President Trump has been putting forward sort of policy ideas. Say, okay, well, if we increase the amount of policing and we arrest the criminals, then the amount of crime will go down. Now, that's a statement of the obvious. Yet the ideologues and the fanatics and the leftists and the globalists are all arguing frantically against that. Now, there are a number of forces sort of converging here. You've just got the leftist sort of things are saying, well, the black people are oppressed, so we can't imprison them because that's just more oppression. So we don't want more oppression. How do we create less oppression? So if we don't charge them or imprison them or convict them, then that's less oppression. So somehow that's a better thing. I mean, that's madness, of course, but it's ideologically consistent. Then you have the globalists that are coming along and saying, well, mass black crime that spreads sort of everywhere, that creates, destroys social cohesion. And that's what the globalists want. They want places, economic zones with no social cohesion. So that kind of suits them ideologically. Then you just get the free riders, the grifters, and so on, whose careers and lives depend on all this sort of social and race grifting mayhem, and so they want to continue simply because it's their meal ticket, even though they may not necessarily have a direct ideological involvement. Then you get the black street people who are kind of in it as well, because it's how they lived in Africa, how they've continued to live, and how they live today. So when the fear of lawlessness sort of pervades, then the amount of or as the amount of policing rather declines, then the lawlessness increases in relative proportion. And you could prove that pretty much anywhere around the world where this particular demographic exists. It doesn't matter whether they've been living amongst whites for hundreds of years, they still revert back to racial type. Not in every case. There are exceptions. Now, the argument, there's, I guess, a few different. On one side, you've got the policing thing saying, look, if we police the area and stop crime from happening and arrest criminals when crime does occur, then there'll be less crime. Now, again, no argument there. That's clear. So that straight away that defaults to the argument that, well, these people the black people are oppressed anyway. Imprisoning them and policing them harshly or intensively is more oppression. We don't want that. So how can we stop them from committing crime and also reduce their supposed, again, this is ideologically determined oppression. How can we lessen the oppression or the burdens of oppression that they supposedly, and again, ideologically determined, that they endure? So now the leftist ideologues, along with globalist scripting and leftist Marxist type scripting, they say, well, if we don't police the black areas intensively, if we say we police them areas that are equivalent to the white areas, what's wrong with equality and equity in policing? White areas don't have many police. Why should the black areas? Well, the reason the black areas traditionally have more police is because they commit more crime. So where the crime is where the police go. Now, I lived in a town growing up, an all white town, where there was a police station that was staffed, or there was only police officers there one day a week. One day a week, the police officers were there. The nearest police station was like 20 miles away. And so the police would be there, 1 or 2 officers, and they'd be there between 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, to one day a week. Now, why were the police not there every day, all day and through the night? Well, why not? Well, because there was no crime. The most serious crimes committed were if a neighbour would cut down the roses of the other neighbour that were overhanging their fence line. That was the height of the criminality. So police are needed where the crime is. Now, this is where it rubs up against the sort of the black eye. Well, why are there so many police here? That's the problem is the amount of police. And if we didn't have so many police, there wouldn't be so many crimes recorded, and therefore there wouldn't be so many convictions. And why are there only white people in the prosecutors department? The attorney general. If all these people are black and tribally supporting the black community, then they won't convict as often, or they won't arrest people black people as often. So all that sort of stuff. Now, if you don't convict criminals, there'll be less crime. That's almost absurd. It's like a kid closing their eyes, pretending that no one else can see them or something. It's quite absurd. But anyway, coming back to the slogans that are being thrown around. So, the mayor of Chicago recently, in a absurdly junior high school type defiant speech, was saying, well, we don't need more police, or we don't need more convictions, or we don't need more prosecution. What we need is more money. And if we throw money at whatever quantity is required, and keep on throwing money indefinitely, forever keep on throwing money, then we'll solve the problem. Now, you could say, well, look, we'll solve the problem. We'll give every black person in Chicago a waterfront mansion to live in, and a hot set of wheels, and they can have the pick of hot blonde chicks that they fantasize about. That'll fix the problem. I don't think it would actually, but it indicates the extent to which the fantasy applies. And they live in a fantasy world that just throwing buckets of money at things can solve the problem. Now, they tried this to some extent in parts of New York, so years ago. So they would get sort of black ghetto kids, single mum with 6 kids, that sort of stuff, and they would pay the mother for the kids to stay at school. So the theory was that kids that leave school early, black kids, and they're low IQ, they haven't, they're not studious or conscientious in their studies or anything like that, that they leave school at an early age, get involved in the gangs, and then by the age of 14 or 15, they're having shootouts in the downtown area, or drug join gangs, and they're too busy murdering each other to live any other life, and most of them live short, brutish lives, murdered by the time they're 21, for goodness sakes, by other blacks. So the idea is, well, look, we'll keep these kids at school, and then we'll graduate them through senior high school and through college. So by the time they finish their education, they're like 24 years old or something like that, and 25 years old, and then they're much less likely to go into gangs and much less likely to shoot each other. Now, that is true, by the way. But they're creating they're replacing one artificial world with another. And I've actually met kids or young men by the time I met them anyway, and hired some. The company I worked for opened up offices in the United States, and I was involved in the hiring of some of these guys. So we're looking at kids who've been through junior high school, senior high school, and they've got 2, not 1, but 2 degrees, or they've got a degree and a master's. And again, they're like 23, somewhere between 23 and 25 years old. And yet they're still illiterate. They can barely count to 10, and they're still illiterate. Now, you can sort of detect that. So you can see the cogs in the brain sort of moving slowly when you're talking to them. You think, is this guy on something? Has he been dropping some downers or something? What's going on? Why is he? You can see the brain just very slowly going through the basic computations that you or I might take a millisecond to compute. But so so once I detect that, I'd ask some simple questions, like Okay, if I've got 100 pennies and I take away 50 pennies, how many pennies do I have left? And then there'd be a look on the face, the eyes would, just glaze over, and and you could see them struggling with the mathematics of this. Now, so how many did you say? 100. And how many are you taking away? 50. So what you're saying is you're taking away 50 pennies from 100. Yes. So what does you want to know? That's the level of that's the level of intellect these people have. And this is I'm talking to a guy who's got 2 degrees, or a degree and a master's and so on. So the same thing would be for the written language, or you just sort of give them a simple sentence to, okay, what does this sentence mean? And they don't know. And you work out pretty quickly that these people, this is the black kids, these people, young men or women, these people are illiterate and can barely count to 10 even. So they've just kept them at school, not to give them an education, because that's failed horribly, not to give them, but to just keep them off the street. Now, it has succeeded in keeping them off the street, or largely. But then they come out with, they've been gifted affirmative action, DEI, gifted, a degree and a PhD and whatever. They come out and they've got heightened expectations. Okay, I've got a PhD, same as those white guys there. So I want what those white guys have got. So that white guy with his PhD in nuclear physics has got a really good job in, wherever. I want what he's got. I've got a PhD. He's got a PhD. Therefore, I can have a job as a nuclear. Well, no, there's actually a difference. He busted his ass for that degree. He hit the books and he studied his ass off and worked really hard to get that PhD. Whereas you were just given one by the ideological political system just to keep you off the street, so you didn't become a gang member shooting the crap out of your fellow blacks. So, but they can't. They don't have the brain power to understand that. So what they've done here with this, and this is something I noticed many years ago. What they've done is they've simply moved the problem around. They've moved, instead of the guy getting killed in gun shootouts at the age of 15 or something in the downtown. Instead of that, they just kept him at school. But now they've got a black guy. Sure, he's not in the gangs, but he's now got a whetted appetite. He's now got an appetite for a good life that is just as far away, than when he was than if he was running around in gangs shooting each other. They've just managed to keep him off the street for a bit longer, but they haven't managed to add any value to anything. But now they've got a very sort of bitter guy who is still going to end up working as a barista or sweeping the floor or flipping burgers at McDonald's or whatever. So that idea of an education, as say the mayor of Chicago or other black cities, Baltimore and DC, doesn't matter. They say, well, education is the key. Well, sure, if you've got a bright kid who's prepared to, the kid's naturally bright, he's got a high IQ and he's going to go to college and hit the books and do the hard work and so, sure, hey, help that kid. Give that kid every assistance you possibly can. I'm totally for that. But the number of kids that are going to be helped there is very small. And the ones that would have gone to join the gangs would still join the gangs anyway. They're low IQ people that are never going to succeed in the education sector or in higher education. So is it actually worth doing that, as in and keeping them at school? I do concede that keeps them off the street for a bit longer. That I concede. But to what social benefit? Because it's hugely expensive to keep these kids, these dumbass kids who aren't going to, and it's also debasement of the education system to keep on giving them free passes. Because the minute you apply any sort of rigor, they're going to go, screw you, I'm out of here, I'm going to go and join the gangs. So that you can't apply any sort of rigor to their education because you have to keep them in play, which means you have to, soft grade them or just fantasy grade them. So this doesn't solve any social problem in my view. So looking at sort of investment, even aside from the education, so investment. If we have lots of social housing, that'll create fewer criminals. Again, I concede that does have kids on the street with nowhere to live. and the only place they can go is some sort of I don't know, some sort of overnight stay place with a hostel, or that type of thing. There are certain rules that these hostels have. You can't act in a disruptive manner. You can't go shooting other people in the place. You can't go killing the guy in the room next door. And these are rules that these people don't like. So they go, screw you, I'm not staying here. I want the right to shoot someone that disrespects me, and so they go back on the street anyway. So then the argument is, well, if we give them their own place, their own house or their own apartment or their own dwelling, then they can do what they want inside that dwelling, and so they won't end up getting into a situation of friction with another person. So therefore that would create less drama, and again would have the effect of keeping them off the street more than would otherwise be the case. But if you have an all-black neighbourhood, which tends to be how it goes, then these people find lots of ways of being disrespected. So coming back to the next level here, there's the black people have been encouraged, not only by their own activists, but by Marxist activists, hitherto, paid by the Soviet Union in the Cold War days, but still around, today in other forms, saying, well, white people are oppressing you. You have white people's laws are not legitimate. White people's courts and prisons are not legitimate. Nothing that the white people do to you is legitimate. The fact you don't have a waterfront mansion and a hot set of wheels in the driveway, that proves the whites have oppressed you, and so on and so. So they've been encouraged to not only disregard the law, it's Whitey's law, why should you bother to disregard that law, but also perceive it as oppressive in itself. So if you won't let me steal that car, if you won't let me shoot that person, or you want to punish me for it, then you're oppressing me, and what you're doing is not legitimate. And this is something that I find interesting, that when say just a simple traffic stop or something like that, a black person's pulled over, and many have outstanding warrants, all that sort of stuff. They just try and run away or fight the police officer, or try and have a shootout with the police and this sort of thing. And this is by the activists. Just a simple traffic stop has turned into a murder. No, it's not. So this view of encouraging black people at all levels, at school, at government, and everything. The political, particularly the Democrat Party activists, the George Soros, the NGOs. There is a vast network of people all telling black people white man's law is not legitimate. White man's policing is not legitimate. White man's courts are not legitimate, and so on. The only way you can believe it is legitimate is if they let you steal anything you want and kill anyone you want. Then it becomes legitimate. I mean, that's absurd. Why any society would condone, tolerate, or approve of such messaging is quite beyond me. Now, I happen to have hired some black people who have, they had the 2 degrees in the senior high school, who were again functionally illiterate and mathematically illiterate, and they still had the black propensity to believe that they were being disrespected. So they would see disrespect everywhere, and it sort of staggered me that again, black people every weekend or every Monday, this black guy would come in and he would gleefully tell us all about the fights he'd had because some white guy had supposedly disrespected him in some way, or disrespected his wife in some way, or disrespected somehow in some way. And I intrigued. I'd ask him, well, what was this disrespect? He brushed past me in when I was standing there, and that was just disrespect. So I went up to him and told him he better apologize to me, or I'd fight him for brushing past you. I mean, you're kidding. But that was the hair trigger level of disrespect that I'd see. And this is like the street gangs here. You disrespected me. I'm going to shoot you. or you won't let me steal your car. You're disrespecting me, and you want to, the police want to pull me over, and they're disrespecting. So this concept of disrespect is deeply baked in. And if you're going to spend money on anything, you'd spend money on say, look, you guys need to change your behaviour. If your behaviour changes, then the police will lose interest in you. Don't do criminal things and you won't get arrested. Now, but I want what Whitey has. I want that car. I want those things. And I can't be bothered to work for it. Well, okay. So that's where if there's going to be money spent on anything, it's listen, you guys need to learn to behave. Now, if you don't want to behave, acceptably in a white society, that's fine too. That's okay. Here's a ticket to go back to Africa, or you're going to go to prison. I mean, here are your choices, and there needs to be an effort there. So every NGO and every element of government or anything that is saying these people, all those laws are illegitimate. You should be able to kill anybody you want. You should be able to steal anything. That has to be dealt with, and the laws. And the police and so on, they are legitimate. Are they perfect? Well, no, but they are legitimate. And if you don't commit crimes, then you won't have a problem. And this needs to be something that's strongly reinforced, because the idea of just throwing money at this and keeping kids at school and so on, it solves one problem but creates two more. So ultimately, it's not a solution for a society. And it creates more of a time bomb. Well, I've got 2 degrees. Those police aren't allowed to say anything to me. No. Just having a 2 degrees, it means you shouldn't be committing. But I haven't got what Whitey wants. Look, I haven't got that good job, and the hot white chicks. No. And that needs to be dealt with. Now, I don't know that it can be solved like that. But just saying, well, look, we just won't put you in prison when you commit crimes. That's similarly not a solution either. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.